Hello, my name is Kay, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about comic books. Last week, I talked about the Great Lake Avengers, all of the comics that were released between the years 2005 and 2007, which included the original four-issue miniseries, Great Lake Avengers Misassembled, and then a couple of specials, a Christmas special and a summer special. After that, if you haven't seen those, then you can find the video. It's called The Worst Avengers. That's where I cover all of that. It turns out, and I already knew this, when I did it last week, there was more Great Lake Avengers comics. There was actually another. I'm going to call it an ongoing because it was an ongoing that came out in 2016, ran until 2017, only ran for 7 issues. But the reason I call it an ongoing is because it was cancelled. It wasn't planned out to be a miniseries. That's why it ended on a weird number like 7. So yeah, Marvel had an initiative in 2016 called Marvel Now, where I'm pretty sure they were just throwing anything at the wall to see if it would stick, because I can't think of a single reason as to why they chose to do another Great Lake Avengers series. It had been 9 years since the last one. There was no Great Lake Avengers project in the making, at Marvel Studios or anything. It's not like they were trying to sell the characters. I guess Marvel were just like, Rick and Morty's huge. Like, adult cartoons are a thing. Great Lake Avengers is the closest thing that we have to like a comic that is in the style of an adult cartoon. Let's bring it back and also have the writer be the same guy that wrote Rick and Morty comics. Zach Gorman is the one who writes this, alongside artist Will Robson and Tamara Bonvillain, or Bonvillain, however you pronounce it. So yeah, they released this Great Lake Avengers comic, and I went in it completely open-minded. I'd already heard before I'd read this that this was not well received at all, this comic, which is sad to hear because I read the original Great Lake Avengers comics and I enjoyed those quite a lot. But I still decided to go in this completely open-minded to see my own opinion on this book. The cover of the book is kind of misleading because it has the entire team on it, but they aren't a team in this. At least not yet. Like, Squirrel Girl and Mr. Immortal appear on the front cover with the rest of the Great Lake Avengers, and I'm just going to say it now, they do not appear alongside the other members of the Great Lake Avengers in this book, like in this issue at all. They're not even considered members of the team, because at this point in time, the team has disbanded. A lot of time has happened between the last special, so Zach and Will were basically just able to do whatever they wanted and just say that it happened in between. So one of the things that happened is they disassembled. The issue's cover also has Mr. Tenenbaum on it, who serves no purpose in this issue. Like, he doesn't even appear. Mr. Tenenbaum is the arch nemesis of the Great Lake Avengers. He's just a guy that has a Christmas theme that creates like evil trees and stuff. He is on the cover and he's not in the book at all. But then there's another villain who is on the cover called Shriek, who is in the book. So I don't know what they're doing with the cover of the book, where they're just like, they got things that do happen, and then they've got things that don't happen at all. I don't know. It's kind of weird. So let's just get straight into it, shall we? Issue 1 of Great Lake Avengers begins at Ferrari and Hindell Associates, New York, which is Connie Ferrari is the representative of the Avengers, apparently. Apparently they have a representative, or like a lawyer, and she finds out that the Avengers name, a bunch of people had trademarked it, including Flatman had tried trademarking the name Avengers, and he got in trouble for it. And apparently, somehow, the name Avengers has fallen out of the hands of any of the real Avengers. And so Flatman, on a technicality, or just pure dumb luck, now owns the name Avengers because nobody else owns it currently because things have been happening with the Avengers, I guess, at this point in time at Marvel. I haven't been reading the Avengers, so I don't know why they no longer own their own name, but Flatman does. So they go and visit Flatman at his unit to try and convince him to give them the name back. And he's just playing an online video game. He's no longer operating as a superhero. One thing, one of the reading this, one of the issues I have is that all of these characters, they share the same name, they share the same appearance, but they don't feel like the same characters, because in the previous Great Lake Avengers comics, Flatman was, I would say, the most eager of the Great Lake Avengers to do his job and to be a team. So it's weird seeing him be one of the Great Lake of one of the past members be completely against like he's no longer operating as a superhero. He's just getting residual checks off of a book that he wrote called The Flat Out Truth, which is a funny name for a book related to him. It just feels like that it's weird that he's the one that seems to have given up when he was the one that was doing like recruitment drives and stuff for the original team. Like he was going out to New York with Doorman and Squirrel Girl trying to recruit people. Yeah, I don't know. Or just Doorman because Squirrel Girl hadn't joined at the time. So anyway, he meets with Ferrari and they have a conversation and they basically just ask him what he wants in return for the trademark of the name. And Flatman just wants the Great Lake Avengers to be recognized again as an actual Avengers team. And so Ferrari agrees. She doesn't want to, but she agrees to reinstating the Great Lake Avengers as a proper Avengers team. For some reason, they still see the Great Lake Avengers as more of a nuisance than an actual team, even though they have proven in the past. Like, they literally stopped the end of the world, and yet they're still seen as just a bum team that can't do anything right. It's like, the great thing about the Great Lake Avengers, the thing I like about them, is that they fumble, but they still do good. They take care of actual villains, and they stop pretty big plots that are going on, and not even accidentally. Like, they do it. They work together and they figure it out. And this book is kind of just like, nah, they're all useless. They're all dumb. Like, they're just like a terrible team. Yeah, I don't know. I think this book also has a problem with balancing the humor. And because another thing I loved about Dan Slott's Great Lake of Avengers is that it has a lot of humor in it, but it also has a lot of serious stuff in it too. And maybe it changes as this series goes on, but issue 1 is very much humor first and then character second. Everyone's just funny in this. Everyone's spitting jokes. Even Big Bertha. Like, the thing about the original series is that there was a couple of characters that were funny, and then the other characters weren't trying to be funny. They were funny by circumstance. Funny to us as the reader. But to them, they're just normal people living their lives, and their lives just happen to be funny or ironic. Like Mr. Immortal. Big Bertha was never trying to be funny. In fact, she was the least funniest character in the original series. She was probably the most serious. And yet here, she's a lot less serious. By the way, in the original series, Big Bertha was Ashley and Bertha. As Ashley, she was a slim model. And then as Bertha, that was her other form that she would take. And in the original series, she treated that as though they were both her. But they weren't the real her. The real her was what was on the inside, not what was on the outside. This book kind of throws that away where it's complicated to talk about because obviously they go in the route of Bertha is now a plus-sized model, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. The problem with that for me is that she's been pushed into that role now, where she is officially, like, she is now defined by her appearance. That is the problem that I have. She is now defined as being, she's the big one. You know, she's the plus-sized character. And that goes against what she wants as a character. She doesn't want to be defined by either of her appearances. She doesn't want to be defined as the skinny model, but she also doesn't want to be defined as Big Bertha. You know, she is not like that's not her. You know, she doesn't want to be defined as either of those body types, and she hates it when people objectify her at either way. You know, she always wishes that people would just see her what she's like on the inside. So having Ashley just decide to change her name to Bertha, which is what happens in this, and to lean in on the Bertha, on her Bertha body, instead of just staying true to who she is and wanting to be both, you know, because she sees both as a part of her, feels, you know, it feels like they're trying to be progressive, but in doing so, they're taking away the interesting part of Ashley, which is that she loves both parts of her. You know, she loves being a skinny model, but she also loves being Big Bertha. And yeah, she just doesn't see those as being the real her. It also doesn't feel like it's coming out of a good place, this decision to make her Bertha all the time. The way that Zach Gorman says it, where there's a moment in this where Dorman is like, "Hey Bertha, can you go into your skinny form?" Because they're trying to break into a building and there's a gate in the way, and so Dorman uses his body in order to let her through. And like, he asks her if she can go into his skinny form, and it upsets her for some reason. It's one of those weird things where it's like she somehow has this weird adversity to being in her other form now. It's like she doesn't want to be in that form. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it feels out of character for her to get mad about that, where it's like, if it was Big Bertha in the previous series, she'd be like, yeah, sure. Because she has no problem with being in either form, because that's just who she is. And then she would just turn back into Big Bertha afterward if she wanted to, you know? So it feels weird that she would get mad at him. And her answer to him is, it's 2016, Doorman, which makes it feel like, that's why I think this isn't coming out of the good of the writer's heart of doing this. This is more the writer trying to be like, oh, like, things are woke now, so, like, Big Bertha can't be skinny anymore. And obviously she would complain about that and be like, oh, it's 2016, Doorman, like, we're trying to be progressive. Like, it feels like they're knocking it instead of like wholeheartedly doing it, you know? That's the hard thing about doing characters like Big Bertha, is that it's really hard to do it without upsetting anyone, you know? I don't know. That's kind of my opinion on the whole Big Bertha thing. I'm disappointed that she's no longer free to be who she wants to be and is instead just, I don't know. It doesn't feel like an in-character decision for her to be Bertha all the time. But that's just my 2 cents. Coming from somebody who's read all the previous Great Lake Avengers books. So Flatman, let's get back to the story. Flatman invites all of the members of the Great Lake Avengers to meet with him so that they can reunite as a team. This brings in another problem that I have with this, which is needless retcons that make characters worse. Flatman can apparently turn 3D whenever he wants, because they meet him at the diner. Like, Big Bertha meets him at the diner, right? and he's just looks normal. He looks like a normal guy. He's not flat. And he reveals that like he could always turn 3D. He just never did for some reason. And it feels like it. I don't want to make these kind of accusations, but it feels like Will was being lazy and didn't want to draw Flat Man flat all the time, so he drew him as a normal guy, and then they just retconned it that he's just like he can look normal. He doesn't look flat all the time. It's just weird because like not only does it make him even more of a feel like even more of a Mr. Fantastic copy, because now he's just like a guy that can stretch and turn flat at will instead of just a guy who's forced to be flat all the time, and because it's his mutant gene, is that he's flat. He has no control over it. It's a part of his character, and it feels weird that they took that away. It makes him less interesting, in my opinion. Yeah, they're just like, why do you look normal? And he's like, I can always look normal. Like, what? Did you think I was did you think I wasn't choosing to be flat all the time? Like, how do you think I could, like, eat or drink or anything? And it's like, why are you trying to make sense out of a comic book, Zach? Like, he's a comic book character. It doesn't matter how he drinks and eats and stuff. As a reader, you just assume that he does that. You don't need to try and make sense out of it by being like, oh, he can turn normal and that's how he eats and drinks. It's like, come on. Doesn't matter. Doorman shows up and Flatman admits that Mr. Immortal and Squirrel Girl haven't gotten back to him for some reason. Squirrel Girl's busy hanging out with Captain America, Sam Wilson, and because Sam Wilson is Captain America, and Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and Jane Thor. Which is the fact that she's hanging out with like other characters that share the same name as another character, was that done on purpose? That she's hanging out with Captain America, Spider-Man, and Thor, but it's not the ones that you normally think of. It's the other ones. Was that done on purpose? Is that supposed to be a knock at them or something? I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It just feels a bit like of a coincidence that it happens to be those three characters. So yeah, she doesn't pick up her call when they call him, when they call her. And so Doorman shows up where Flatman and Big Bertha are, and he is also kind of made out to be like he's not good at doing his job, because as we know, he is now an embodiment of death, and so he goes around and he like kills people and brings them to the afterlife. And in this book, it's stated that he's not good at his job, even though in the previous GLA books, he was shown as being pretty good at being an emissary of death. So again, it's another example of like trying to make the GLA look shit for no reason, where it's like, oh, they all suck. It's like, no, they don't suck. They're just weird. They're weird characters. It's not like they're bad at their jobs. Maybe at first they were, but like they got better. They're just weird characters. So they decide that they're just going to wait for Mr. Immortal and Squirrel Girl to join them eventually and just go out and look for things to do as superheroes as a team for their first time reuniting. Meanwhile, we meet these two characters. One of them's named Lucky, and the other character's name, she doesn't have a name yet. Her brother never says her name. We learn her brother's name because his name's Lucky, but we never learn her name. She loves drawing furry characters. Yeah, she's a furry in this. They're talking to each other, her and her brother, and then a massive explosion happens. In her room, and it's because of this villain named Firebrand. He's just this guy made out of fire. He's just attacking the entire town. And there's another villain called Pitchfork who makes all sorts of pitchfork puns and stuff. He's threatening this woman and her child. So this unnamed girl transforms into a furry. Like, she transforms into a blue wolf, the same one that she was drawing on her computer. And she, I guess, attacks Pitchfork off screen. We don't get to see what she does, but yeah, she transforms into him and he wets himself. She transforms into her furry form and he wets himself. The Great Lake Avengers are now driving in a minivan instead of the car that they had, which was the Quinjetta. They don't have that anymore. They just have like a caravan. So they drive all the way to the Stark Assembly and Manufacturing facility, which is in a part of the town that they're supposed to be visiting, just to see, like, they're in the bad part of town, waiting for something to show up so they can do superhero stuff. It's not really clear exactly what they're trying to do. Like, it's not really made clear exactly what their plan is. It's just to go find something to do. And so Firebrand and Shriek are there, watching the Great Lake Avengers from a distance, just being like, those guys showed up. Let's rock, paper, scissors to see which of us, like, takes them down. And then they get into an argument about rock, paper, scissors because they do it. And then he's just like, oh, you cheated. Like, that's not how you do rock, paper, scissors. And so, like, these two villains are just, like, bickering with each other. So, using Doorman, the Great Lake Avengers break through a gate where they meet this punk lady, this punk woman who comes out, and she's like, are you Flatman? And Doorman's just like, isn't that obvious? And she's like, I don't like to assume. So again, it feels like, again, that the writers are kind of knocking the whole thing of, like, not assuming a person's gender or identity. That's what this feels like with this one punk character that just consistently says over and over again, I don't like to assume. It's then revealed that the reason this punk woman is here is because she apparently received all the texts that Flatman was sending to Mr. Immortal. And Flatman's just like, why did you show up if I was asking Mr. Immortal to come meet us? And she's just like, I told you I don't assume. You know, come on, I'll show you around. And so she invites the Great Lake Avengers into this, like, rundown building that she lives in, which maybe Mr. Immortal lives in too. And meanwhile, we find out where Mr. Immortal currently is. He's currently buried alive for some reason. There's, like, a giant pole sticking out of the ground, and he's in a coffin, and the pole is, like, coming in through to him, I guess, to help him breathe. It says that he's bored, so I guess he buried himself because he's bored. And he's just like, well, file this one under things I regret. So I guess the idea is that, like, he buried himself and now he can't get out and he regrets it because he's still alive and there's no escape. So I guess we'll find out what happens to him and who this woman is that the Great Lake Avengers met in the next issue. Alright, so issue 2 begins in Detroit. That's where the Great Lake Avengers currently are staying. They're in Detroit because Detroit is being ravaged by supervillains. Also, they've heard, so they're there to, you know, try and stop the supervillains if they show up. It turns out, right, that all of the superheroes that were in Detroit have been driven out of Detroit by this councilman whose name is Dick Snerd. Dick Snerd is actually a supervillain who wears a devil mask. It's incredibly obvious when you're reading this. They try to pass it off as some kind of plot twist by the end of the issue where they're just like, oh, it was Dick Snerd the whole time. He's the guy in the devil mask. But no, like, it's so obvious because this guy is on television saying, you know, that, like, these supervillains are attacking a place like Detroit, which breeds, like, criminals and crime, so he sees them as heroes. And meanwhile, the guy in the devil mask is talking about how, you know, they see themselves as heroes even though they are supervillains. So, because the councilman and him are on the same side, it's pretty obvious that they are the same guy. So Flatman and Big Bertha and Doorman all go to the local bar to have a drink, and that's where Big Bertha meets this guy with the devil mask who is Dick's nerd, and his fellow supervillains. They all mock the Great Lake Avengers, including Mr. Immortal, and that causes Big Bertha, like, that really pisses her off. So she attacks the supervillains and ends up in prison for attacking them because I guess they're welcome in the city. I guess because the councilman is, like, backing them. So, you know, because Bertha attacked them, they get sent to prison. Meanwhile, that girl who could turn into a blue furry wolf, who I swear her name has not been stated. I went back looking through the first issue to see if they ever say her name. They never say her name. All we know is that we know her brother's name is Lucky, but we don't know what her name is. And we still don't learn what her name is in this issue. Is it like, did Zach forget to give her a name? Did he think that he said her name, but didn't? Is she supposed to be some big reveal later? I don't know, because I don't know what her name is. But her brother is in hospital, and he too can turn into a giant wolf, only he is pink. He starts turning into a wolf on his hospital bed, and so she quickly, like, covers his arm, and the nurse just comes in and is just like, why are you trying to cover your brother's pink werewolf arm? And this girl's just like, how did you know? And she's like, because he's not the first werewolf that I've had in here. Like, I just knew that he had an arm. I knew because the story needed me to know, even though there was no reason for me to know, because I didn't see the pink arm. I'm just assuming that he has one, or just saying that I know. So this girl sees Dick's nerd on the TV talking about how he thinks the supervillains are superheroes because they're attacking a city that's full of crime, and that really annoys her because, you know, her brother was hurt by these supervillains. So she heads off to throw a bottle at Dick, which she does. She sees him at his he's having, like, his speech. She throws a bottle at him, and then she gets taken to prison, and it just happens to be, I guess they just have one jail, like one place to lock up people in Detroit. So the Great Lake Avengers are there. They're all locked up in prison. And I have to say that I hate the dialogue in this book. Everyone talks as if they are some kind of comedian. They all talk really stupid. Like, the dialogue in this is so stupid, especially for, like, Dick's nerd. But not just Dick's nerd. Even characters like Ferrari, who is the who I mentioned in the first issue is the lawyer of the Avengers. Even she just has stupid dialogue. Like, let's give an example of some of the stupid dialogue in this, right? So Ferrari shows up and she's like, unless somebody can explain to me right now why they threw my clients, the Avengers, in jail for doing their bleeping job. There's a lot of swearing in this book. I'm going to shove an infinity gauntlet so far up the station's collective ass that you'll all be erasing realities when you fart. That's the kind of dialogue that is in this book. Nearly everyone talks like that, you know. And then not long after that, you have Dick Snerd say stuff like, you're going to regret this, all of you. Trust me, I'm a powerful man. I'm a big man. I'm a big man with a lot of power. My power is barely contained by my bigness. That is the kind of dialogue that you are dealing with when you're reading this book. Like, it's just the most brain-rotting, like, stupid dialogue I've ever read, like, in a comic book. And there's zero moments in this that feel like the original Great Lake Avengers, where, like, it gets real for a sec, you know, and the characters feel like real characters for a moment, you know. They're joking 1 second, but then the next second, they're acting like real people who care about one another. There's a moment in this where Big Bertha, like, it's almost as if Big Bertha is going to have, like, a nice moment with this girl, you know, because obviously she gets brought in by the authorities, and then she's like, let go of me, and she turns into her wolf form and starts attacking them, and so they take that as an opportunity for Big Bertha and Flatman to break out of the jail and try to stop her. So we have a bit of a moment where Bertha tries to talk to her to get her to stand down, but it's ruined by the stupid dialogue. Instead of just talking like an actual person who cares, Big Bertha is just like, look, it's okay, kid. Just relax. This doesn't need to get out of hand. Blah, blah, blah. Power, responsibility, all that fun stuff. You don't want to hurt anyone, right? It's just like, why is she talking like that? You know, if you're trying to make somebody stand down, why would you talk as if you don't care? Because, like, the way that the dialogue is phrased, it's as if Big Bertha just doesn't give a crap about, like, what she's even saying. You know, where she's just like, blah, 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 power and responsibility, all that shit. You don't want to do this, right? Like, why would this girl listen to her when Big Bertha doesn't even believe what she's saying? Like, it seems like she doesn't even believe what she's saying. You know, you take Big Bertha, who is this, she was always the rational one of the group. She was always the one that was able to, like, she was always the one that made, like, she was the real one. Like, she was the one that, like, when you needed to get real, she got real and emotional and deep whenever it was needed. But in this, she's just like, yeah, whatever. Like, oh, you don't want to do this, kid, right? Like, everyone's just has to be funny. It's like Zach Gorman is trying too hard to be funny. He's focusing too much on being funny instead of actually writing a good book. And that's my biggest issue with this book so far, is that it's trying too hard to be funny all the time. It never lets itself breathe. It never lets a joke breathe. There's a joke every single panel. Everyone's making a joke. There's always some stupid dialogue or some kind of joke. It's like you're getting like 30 different jokes thrown at you while you're reading this. You know, meanwhile, Mr. Immortal is buried underground by his friend Mike. He asked Mike to do it. He mentions the reason why he wants to be buried is because of something that happened in the past. I don't know if it's something that we're not supposed to know yet, or if he's referring to the old GLA comics. I guess that's something I'm going to have to find out. But for some reason, Mr. Immortal did something, or something has happened that has pushed Mr. Immortal to want to be buried by his friend for an entire year. And while he's buried, he's made friends with this cork called Mr. Corky. And he's just talking to this cork because Mr. Immortal is insane, I guess. And it's just kind of like all these characters are written to just be incredibly stupid and dumb and just doing all these ridiculous things. Like, this comic goes too far into the ridiculous side of the Great Lake Avengers. Instead of the original series where it was like, these characters are a little silly, but there's a lot of grounded stuff, and there are a lot of times where they feel like real people. In this, they just feel like Looney Tunes characters. They don't feel like real people. They just feel like pale imitations of the original series. Like, Zach Gorman took all the wrong lessons out of that original series, where he's just like, oh, Great Lake Avengers are funny, right? So they'll just be funny all the time and never actually have any interesting or deep moments ever. They're just going to be non-stop jokes. So Doorman figures out where Mr. Immortal is because Mr. Immortal dies while he's buried underground because he uses Corky to cork up the straw that he's using to breathe underground. So he dies, and because Doorman is the emissary of death, he immediately knows where Mr. Immortal is. So he goes and he finds him, and he tries to convince Mr. Immortal to come with him. Mr. Immortal's like, nah, I buried myself under here, and he explains to Doorman why he did it. And Doorman's like, I'm just going to bring you out anyway. So he brings Mr. Immortal out, and he's like, come on, like, we got to go. Like, there's trouble going on down with the rest of the Great Lake Avengers. They could definitely use your help right now. So, because trouble has broken out at the police station with this girl whose name we don't know, turning into her furry form, Miss Ferrari shows up, and because she represents the Avengers and the Great Lake Avengers are now considered Avengers again, she's representing them too. So she shows up and she's like, what are you doing with my clients? Can you, like, leave my clients alone? And she pretty much convinces the authorities to stand down because they have no proof that this girl threw the bottle at Dick Snerd. And that's when Dick Snerd throws a tantrum and leaves and says that stupid dialogue I mentioned earlier. And, Miss Ferrari reveals to this girl that she's now officially a member of the Great Lake Avengers and that she has to look at her contracts. during this whole discussion, we still don't learn what this girl's name is. They never say her name. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, why aren't they saying her name? I keep having to refer to her as this girl because she has no name. And that's when, after he storms out, Dick Snerd goes to his car, he jumps into it, and reveals himself to be the guy with the devil mask that Big Bertha tried to attack at the bar. And to be continued. That's where it ends. And so we'll find out what happens next in issue 3. As we get into issue 3, I have to say, I'm going to give this book credit and say that while this issue does continue the jokes that I'm not really a fan of, there's a lot of stuff in this one in regards to flashbacks. We get a lot of revealing stuff about Flatman. There's a lot of stuff retconned about him. We get to see his backstory for the first time. And it's the first time that this book gets closer to that original series and the kind of tone that Dan Slott was going for when he was showing us flashbacks of Mr. Immortal and some of the other characters. But it's still not, like, as deep. But it's as deep as this book goes, and I kind of enjoy it, you know? I don't really enjoy the rest of the book, which is why I'm just going to summarize that, like, basically, in this one, Dick is, you know, trying to campaign against superheroes, being in Detroit. And so Bertha and Good Boy, which is the name of the girl that can turn into a fursona, they're calling her Good Boy because her fursona is a guy, which is cool. And she herself doesn't actually have a name yet. But yeah, now we have a name for her to go by, but I don't feel good just calling her Good Boy. But that's her name. So Bertha and Good Boy decide to go off to the bar where Bertha tried to beat the crap out of Dick, in order to investigate Dick and see if they can find anything against him to take him down. Mr. Immortal returns to the Great Lake Avengers base, and he and Flatman decide to head off together as well to look for trouble in Detroit, you know, do superhero stuff, because that's mainly the plot of this book, is the Great Lake Avengers just trying to do anything heroic they can possibly do, you know? So they head off in the Flatmobile, and they just have a big fight that kind of comes out of nowhere. They just get really mad at each other. Flatman mentions that in between this series and the last series, Mr. Immortal and Bertha dated, and then they broke up, and that's what broke up the team. I don't know. There's a lot of saying and not showing. It's like, can't you show it to us? Instead of just telling us that that's what happened, show us that that's what happened. And Mr. Immortal believes that Flatman is jealous and that he wants to be the leader of the team. And so that's what causes the fight between them. And then Flatman is like, you're right, I do want to become the leader of the team. But I also just want us to be a team. That's what I care about more. I want us to just be Avengers. I've always wanted to be an Avenger. And nobody treats us seriously. And I want people to treat us seriously more. So I want us to all band together, and we'll turn the opinions of everyone around and make everyone believe that the Great Lake Avengers really are a good team. And it would be a very great moment if it wasn't undercut by a hobo next to them vomiting to kind of ruin the moment. You know, that would have been a great scene between, like a great story moment between, great emotional moment between Mr. Immortal and Flatman, and it's ruined by this hobo just like vomiting. It's like, that's what I'm talking about. It's like this series, this book cannot take itself seriously for a moment. Like, there isn't a single moment in this where there isn't some kind of joke that happens immediately or at the same time as a serious moment. And there already are so few of those. So Big Bertha and Good Boy enter one of the other rooms in the bar, and they find Dick on his desk, passed out. And that's when they discover that he is the man in the devil mask, because we as a reader knew, but they didn't. And so they've just discovered that. He's either passed out or he's dead. I don't know. We're going to find out in the next issue. But for now, we're going to get to the more interesting part of this issue. We've covered all of the stuff that's happening in the present. Now we're going to be talking about the stuff that happens in the past, when we learn more about Flatman. So it's revealed years ago, doesn't give us specifics. In Milwaukee, Flatman used to be this guy named Matt, who worked at a coffee store, and he met this guy named Andrew. And while he was serving coffee, he accidentally dropped a bunch of the coffee cups, and as he catches them, he reveals his powers to everyone, that he's can be really flat. So this is the only reason they made him have the ability, like they retconned that he could look like a regular guy, is so that this flashback could work. Like, that's the only reason. And it will make more sense later as well. Not only so that it would be a surprise reveal to everyone in the coffee store that he can turn flat, but also because his powers come into play later. So after seeing Flatman's powers, after seeing Matt's powers, which is funny that his name's Mac, that rhymes with flat, he gives Matt a newspaper. And I swear, 100%, there's flirting between Matt and Andrew. If you didn't know, Flatman is gay. He came out in the previous GLA series. So reading this, I'm kind of like, is there a thing between them? Like, because that's kind of cool. Like, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see, like, them actually do something with Flatman's with Flatman's sexual orientation, you know, and have him hook up with a guy and end up in a relationship, you know. And Andrew seems like a nice guy, and so he gives Matt a newspaper that's circled on it where it's like they're hiring mutants and people with superpowers to do jobs, and the job is to go to children's parties for like the children of CEOs, disguised as, you know, and most of them want like superhero parties. So Andrew gets Matt to dress up like Mr. Fantastic because he looks a lot like Reed Richards, and has him attend these parties that are like supervillain themed, so that he can pretend to be Mr. Fantastic and get like lots of money from it. There's actually one joke in this that I did laugh at because I thought it was kind of funny. But there's a moment where Matt's just like, I better go, but I'll see you later, right? And Andrew's like, count on it. And I'll go get him, Tiger. And then this guy in a Spider-Man costume comes out and is like, huh? Am I going? And Andrew's just like, not you. I thought that was kind of funny. I thought that was a funny joke. That was, you know, a smart joke, you know. And eventually, Matt gets sick of doing all these kid parties. And he comes up with the idea that he wants to be a superhero. So he's like, Andrew, let's like be superheroes together. You know, I can rename myself Dr. Val Ventura because like I can just say I'm a doctor. And that way people will take me more seriously as a superhero if that's my identity. And then you can be my sidekick, Paperboy. You know, we'll be Flatman and Paperboy. And Andrew's like, why would I be Paperboy? I'm older than you. And like, this is just ridiculous. And Matt's just like, I'm sorry, like, but I'm gonna go become a superhero. And Andrew kind of just like, you know, that's it. Like, he says goodbye, and that's the last time Matt and Andrew speak to each other. And it's never actually confirmed that they do love each other. I mean, Andrew says, I love you, Matt, but like, you can't be a superhero. So it's kind of like, that's the closest you get to them ever actually admitting feelings for one another. And meanwhile, Doorman, so that's all the flashbacks for them. Doorman gets called by Oblivion, who is his master. And Oblivion's just like, what have you been up to, Damar? Like, where have you been? And Damar's is like, it's a long story. And so he, off panel, explains to Oblivion what's been going on. And the issue ends at a house in Milwaukee where Andrew receives a parcel, presumably from Flatman, that says Paperboy in it. And he opens it up and he finds a newspaper. And it says, "The Avengers in Detroit, city in need, finds heroes it deserves." And it has, Matt circled around with the rest of his teammates. And Andrew smiles at it, and that's where it ends. That's the end of the issue. So like I said, this one was a step in the right direction. It's still bathed in bad jokes and, being unable to take itself seriously for even a second. But, like, the flashbacks were pretty all right. Like, they were pretty good. They weren't as good as the flashbacks of, like, from the other series with Mr. Immortal. But they weren't bad. Like, they were a lot better. Step in the right direction. All right, so issue 4, right off the bat, Good Boy and Big Bertha have taken Dick to Dick's Nerd to the Great Lake Avengers HQ in Detroit. They've tied him up so that they can question him or like just keep him contained, because what Dick is doing is that he's hiring villains to to attack Detroit, so that then he, as a councilman, can fix Detroit. So he's making business for himself. Like, he sees himself as the hero of Detroit because he's fixing what the villains are doing. But in order to do that, he's creating it. And we actually learn about Dick's backstory in this. And again, it's another one of those situations where, like, we have something interesting going on, and it's undercut by jokes and just, like, the book not being able to take itself seriously ever. Because, like, it gets pretty serious for a moment. Like, Dick is going over about his time as a superhero, because he mentioned previously that he tried being a superhero, and then he found that being a superhero doesn't get you anywhere, and that it's better to be the villain, even though he sees himself as a hero. So he was this character, this superhero called the Red Dwarf, aka Nain Rouge. He dressed up like a devil. Everyone called him like the cheap version of Daredevil. But he was like, I was in the city of Detroit. I was the only superhero who was protecting Detroit. Where were the Avengers? They weren't here. And he goes to a house where a child and his mom are being held at gunpoint by someone who could be the father. Like, they don't make it clear, but I think this is supposed to be the dad holding his wife at gunpoint. But, like, the dad sees Dick, points the gun at him, and shoots him in the chest. And there's a moment where the kid is, like, crying. They actually switched artists for this. I forgot to mention, for this issue, they switched artists to Jacob Shabbat and Marissa Louise, and I think it's mainly so that they could do this flashback sequence where another great thing about this flashback sequence is that it looks like the old comics, the way it's colored, the way it's drawn. It looks like, it's something from the 80s or the 70s. And yeah, so Dick gets shot in the chest and he falls into a dumpster below and that's when he realizes he's like, being a hero, all it gets you is being shot in the chest. So I'm going to find a better way to be the hero of Detroit. And so that's when he becomes a councilman, starts hiring villains to destroy Detroit so that he himself can fix it. And his story is just completely undercut by Big Bertha and Good Boy just being like, boring, like, your story sucks. Hey, you want to get like a cup of coffee? And Dick's just like, it was a good story. And I'm like, yeah, Dick, it actually was. It turns out you're the most interesting character in this whole book. Who'd have thought? So Bertha goes to make a cup of coffee, and she says the dumbest thing that she could possibly have said to Good Boy. She says to Good Boy, if he moves once, kill him. Like, why would she say that? Why the hell would she say that? And so Dick coughs, and Good Boy's just like, well, I think that counts as moving. Until you think like, oh, is she going to kill him? We'll find out in a bit, because meanwhile, Mr. Immortal and Flatman arrive, where they find Pansy, who has become like she's the punk girl that I mentioned in the previous issue. She has become like their secretary. They enter the house and she's like, "I'm not your secretary," and Flatman's like, "You literally are." Um, and so they're asking like where Big Bertha is, and Pansy's like, Big Bertha came in here like holding a guy or something, and then they see Bertha, and that's when Mr. Immortal and Bertha start having an argument because it's revealed that they were engaged, and then one day Mr. Immortal came home drunk and he started saying all sorts of awful things to Bertha. Um, they start just throwing different like insults at each other. Mr. Immortal calls Bertha stupid for giving up her modeling career and settling for plus size modeling, and Bertha's like, "How dare you, talk about my body that way and the decisions that I'm making?" And Val's just like, "Stop! Like, enough. I don't want this anymore. Like, this is what happened last time. Your arguing is triggering me. Now, will you please just tell me who's here?" And Beth is like, "All right, about that." And so we cut back to Good Boy with Dick, and she's going to kill Dick. Or he's going to kill Dick because she's in Persona form, and Persona is a guy. And Dick's like, you can't hurt me. You can't do anything to me. Because if you do, I'll just get my lawyers to come after you. I've got the greatest lawyers in the entire city. I'm the councilman. You harm me, it's over. I'll just call my lawyers. And she's like, "You're right. I guess I'm going to have to kill you." And he's like, "Wait, what?" And she just starts attacking Dick. She like knocks him over and starts attacking him. And so I'm like, okay, like this is getting interesting. Like good boy is coming across as kind of an interesting character of like, if she kills Dick, what are they going to do? But at the same time, it's like Bertha told her to kill him. Maybe she was joking, but at the same time, it's like, why would you joke about that with somebody that you barely even know? Like, of course, she's probably going to take you seriously, right? And it's funny because Connie and Amy arrive. Like, Connie Ferrari arrives. She's complaining about how she can't find any superheroes to date because Connie has a thing for dating superheroes. There's actually I found another funny joke in this series, a joke that actually made me kind of laugh. Connie's like, "See, this is why you don't date superheroes." What am I talking about? As if you, Amy, would ever date a superhero. And Amy's like, "Yeah, imagine me dating a superhero." And you look at, like, it shows her phone and she's like talking to Gambit on the phone. She's like going out on dates with Gambit. I thought that was funny. I thought that was a funny joke, especially because her thumb is covering up part of Gambit's message. So it just says like, just like last night when you took your and put your against the, and so it's kind of like, what did her and Gambit do last night? Sounds freaky. And so Pansy sees on the monitor screen that Connie and Amy are coming, and so everyone's like, "All right, act natural. We can't let Connie know that something's gone wrong. Like we've kidnapped someone, because otherwise it's over and we're not going to be Avengers anymore. Like we're going to be thrown out." And Val freaks out because he doesn't want to be, like, he wants to continue being Flatman. He wants to be an Avenger. So he starts like trying to hide. And they're like, "All right, let's just be natural." And so they answer the door to Connie. They're all wearing sunglasses. And Flatman, they're just like, "Hey, how's it going, Connie? Like everything's great. Like nothing mysterious going on here." And Flatman's like, "Why are we wearing sunglasses again?" And Mr. Immortal's like, "Because I was told that the Avengers lawyers can see micro expressions." And Beth is like, "I don't think that's a thing." And so they're just acting super weird. And Connie's like, "All right, I've had enough. Why are you acting so weird? Tell me right now." And then Connie hears a noise and she's like, "What the hell is that?" It's like, "If you idiots have been doing superhero work behind my back, this is going right up the ladder to the top brass, and you can kiss your Avengers membership goodbye." And I was just like, "Wait, Connie, like you can't." And he like jumps in front of the door that Connie is like gonna try and get to, where Good Boy is and Dick. She's like, "Let me through." And he's like, "No, I there's nothing I want more than to be an Avenger. Please don't go in there." And Bertha like moves him out of the way. She's like, "Come on, just let her in." And Connie opens the door and the room is covered in blood. and all they find is Good Boy sitting next to, presumably, Dick's corpse. He's like, I messed up. And everyone's just like, shocked. And so we cut to Butler Hospital, where this man named Walter has left the hospital smoking cigarettes when he shouldn't be. And so one of the nurses comes down and is like, Walter, like, give me those cigarettes or I'll shove them up your ass. And then the Flatmobile drives by them and they drop off Dick's body wrapped up. And turns out Dick's not actually dead. He's like mumbling. So he's still alive, but they drop him off at the hospital and they put a little note on him that says, I'm a criminal, with his devil mask. And that's where it ends. And so again, it's another one of those issues, just like the third one, where it's like this book shows glimpses of hope of being a good series when it had like serious moments, like with Dick's flashback and the stuff with Good Boy killing Dick. But then it just keeps undercutting it with humor. Like, it never lets itself breathe. It never lets itself have a moment to just stew in the emotions. Instead, it's just like, Rick and Morty jokes every page, which is because it's being written by one of the writers of the Rick and Morty comics. And I just don't think Zach knows how to balance humor and emotion, in serious moments. Which is funny because Rick and Morty is one of those shows where it's a very funny show, but it has some serious moments. It has some moments where it knows when not to be funny. And this book doesn't know that. All right, so issue 5. Again, we are reminded how this series has moments in it where it feels like it's getting a little bit deeper, a little bit more interesting, but then it does, like, some of the cringiest jokes. Like, a lot of the jokes are like, hello, fellow children kind of jokes, Like, you can tell it's an older person trying to be, like, hip with, like, the current generation, And especially there's a joke at the very end that is very much just like, hello, fellow children, I am hip too. I know what viral is, So the issue begins with, the aftermath of the previous issue, which was Dick Snurd being dropped off at the hospital after Good Boy tore him a new one. And so Connie Ferrari is like telling everyone they got to lay low and not do this again, otherwise they're going to jeopardize their position as an Avengers team. And then she leaves out of frustration. And then Big Bertha is just like, all right, I got to go. I got my job to go to. And this is where one of the things I don't like about this series crops up, which is the fact that, like, the Great Lake Avengers are so mean to each other. Like, I get that the reason why Bertha and Mr. Immortal are mean to each other is because they got engaged off panel and now they're just having, like, divorce spats and stuff. But it's like, that doesn't need to exist. They didn't need to create this kind of problem between the two, because now it's just, like, it's not enjoyable to read, having, like, Mr. Immortal just be, like, so cruel to Bertha, like, pretending that he doesn't remember that she has a modeling job and being just really objectifying to her and insulting towards her physically and emotionally. It just feels unnecessary, especially coming off of, like, the previous GLA comics where I loved, how they just get together for Thanksgiving and stuff, and they're like a family, and they're having a great time as a team, even though everyone kind of looks down upon them. It doesn't matter to them because they have each other. But we don't really have that in this. We're kind of lacking it. Like, Doorman hasn't... It's been a while since Doorman has even shown up. Like, half the time, the team isn't even together, And so Bertha leaves and she passes Lucky, Good Boy's brother. And Lucky has come to find Good Boy because he saw Dick Snurd in the hospital and he knew right away that his sister was responsible for, for what happened to Dick. He also says that he gave Dick a what's Atito Freely, which I don't know what Atito Freely is. Well, I mean, I do know now after reading this. It's basically when you just draw on someone's face with like a mustache and stuff. And I didn't even know that that was the name of it. I don't know if that was like a generational thing of them just trying to be like hip with the current generation, or if that is an out of touch thing where this generation or like my generation doesn't know what that is. He continuously refers to Good Boy as Good, so we basically just get confirmation that her name must just be Good Boy, or at least she doesn't. She refuses to go by a regular name. She only goes by her persona name, which would explain why her brother just goes by the name Lucky. I assumed going into this that Lucky was just his nickname, but no, that's obviously his persona name, and they just call each other that, and they don't really have any actual names, or at least if they do, they're never referred to as such in these. So he comes in and is basically just like, you're leaving. You're leaving the team. Because once Dixner gets out of hospital, he's going to come for you. And so we need to get you as far away from him as possible. It's the only way. Obviously, I am going to give you time to say your goodbyes and pack up, but this isn't your choice. This is my choice. Because I'm your older brother and I'm making those choices for you. Because, like, he blew up our town. He, like, hurt our family. So we need to get as far away from him as possible. Meanwhile, Big Bertha heads to Corktown Meats in order to have her modeling job. And everyone is just such assholes to each other in this. Like, she goes to this shoot, and, like, her manager is so cruel to her. Like, she's just an awful bitch. Like, it's really terrible. And then the guy that's, like, taking photos is awful to her as well. And they have her there because they want her to model for their weight loss supplement. So they want her to be the before and after, because Ashley, I don't care if she's called Bertha now, Ashley is her name, Ashley can, change her body at will, so she's the perfect candidate for this. But she doesn't want to do it because it's sending the wrong message to people, especially because she's lying to people, because she's just turning skinny. She's not actually, losing the weight or anything. So it's like a fake scam. And this guy enters the room called Dr. Nod, and he's the one that created the supplement. And he manages to convince Bertha to do it by offering her $20,000. So she agrees to do it. And this is where the comic is most interesting, because we're dealing with, body image stuff and, like, weight loss supplements and things, which are especially now have become even more prominent, but they were also prominent back in 2016. And just seeing how Bertha has to deal with that kind of, like, those kind of expectations of her just because she has these abilities. And obviously they're not being entirely truthful with Bertha, because this isn't just a regular photo shoot. There's actually a really sad moment where, like, she's modeling for the supplement and they're telling her, like, that she needs to look sadder, that she looks too happy. And that's one of the hard-hitting moments in this where it's like, I feel like that's the moment where this comic has felt the most grounded. They're still telling jokes and stuff during this time, but I feel like that might be the one page in this entire comic where there isn't a single joke. It's just Bertha being told to look sad. And I wish there was just more of that, like stuff where there aren't just one-liners and things, where things get a little bit more real, a little bit more grounded. So it turns out that this Dr. Nod guy actually wants to take Bertha's DNA and use it to create pills that will allow anyone to change their body for 24 hours. So they can be, like, skinny or fat, whatever body they want for 24 hours, so they can live out their fantasies. And in order to do that, he wants Bertha to agree to it, right? But he's also gonna try and do it against her will anyway. So, like, he knocks her out And by he, I mean her manager, like, because her manager is working with Dr. Nod. So her manager, Jan, is the one that knocks her out. She betrays Bertha, which isn't really a surprise because she was so terrible to Bertha. I don't even know why Bertha was so shocked that Jen turned against her. I don't even know why Bertha even likes Jen, because Jen sucks in the time that we see her. We only see her for like 2 pages, but she's so terrible to Bertha. And so Bertha gets taken to this underground facility where Dr. Nod is, and he tells her his plan, and she's like, well, how about I just smash all your faces in and beat the crap out of you? And Dr. Nod and his lackeys all grow really fat because they've all, like, taken the supplements. So they've shown that, like, they've already created this pill and they need Bertha to create more of them. And so it's kind of like a big fight between Big Bertha and, like, I guess you can call him, like, Big Nod, and Big Jen is going to break out in this underground facility in the next issue. Meanwhile, Good Boy leaves the Great Lake Avengers with her brother, and they head off to who knows where. But they're going to go and try and try and find a place to stay. Apparently, Captain America offers places to stay to Avengers who don't have anywhere to stay. It's like a part of being the Avengers. It's a thing. And yeah, that's the entire issue. It ends with the reveal that Dr. Nod and his lackeys have all taken the pills that give them the same abilities as Bertha. Oh, and also there's one final joke I forgot on the last page. One of the doctors is looking at Dick Nerd's body, and it paints it as if it's something really serious, where he's like, my God, that's the best damn Tito Freely I've ever seen. Give me my phone. This is going to go viral. And that's the joke I was talking about, where it felt like they were just kind of being like, hello, fellow children. You know, it wasn't a funny joke, at least not to me. All right, so issue 6. Damar Davis finally returns, aka Doorman. He visits a retirement home where this guy named Gregory Garlic lives, in order to, because he died, so he's gone there to retrieve Gregory. But Gregory appears in front of Damar as a ghost and is like, please don't take me yet, I've got unfinished business. And Damar sees like a picture of a woman and he's like, that's my wife Irene, like, please, can I just say goodbye to her before you take me away to oblivion? Damar's like, fine, we'll go say goodbye to Irene and then you're going to oblivion, alright? And so they go to Irene's house, but it's not actually Irene's house. It's this other guy's house. And that's when Damar finds out that Gregory is lying and that Irene is actually his brother's wife. But they did have a thing in the 70s. And Damar's like, all right, I've had enough. You're going away to oblivion. And Gregory's like, please, no, I want time. Please, just give me time. And Damar's like, I can't give you time because if I don't take you now, if I don't meet my body quota, like, my master will be incredibly mad at me. And then the owner of the house comes in and has a heart attack when he sees a ghost, and he dies. And so Gregory's like, I guess you met your body quota for the day, so I can stick around for a bit longer. Meanwhile, Bertha faces Dr. Nod and her crew after they've used the supplements to grow, like, big like her. And he says that he just wants her compliance with it, where, like, she's not going to tell anyone what they've done because they've already gotten what they need from her. He just doesn't want her to say anything. And her answer to that is that she just grabs Dr. Nod and slams his head into the ground, and then turns to Jen and fires her. And, like, she's like, are you firing me? And Bertha's just like, something like that, and smashes her for a wall. This is a callback to a previous moment where Jen basically threatens to fire Big Bertha and says the same thing. So Bertha causes the roof to collapse in on everyone and makes her escape. And Dr. Nod gets up and eats all of the supplements. He eats like hundreds of them and turns into a giant blob. Um, yeah, and his speech is reduced to that of a toddler, essentially. Like, he can't talk very well. He's just become like a mindless blob who's going to force his supplements on everyone in the city while also destroying the city because he's so massive. And so, as Bertha leaves and tries to text the Great Lake Avengers about what's going on, he smashes through the wall and tries to grab her. And Bertha tries punching him, but her hand just goes into him because he's so big that she can't do anything to him. So he just knocks her away and leaves to attack the city. And Bertha just finds herself exhausted and kind of passes out on like these on like a pile of bricks. Meanwhile, Mr. Immortal is working on the Flatmobile alongside Flatman, and while they're working on the Flatmobile, these two guys show up, and it's... So these guys, one of them's a graphic designer, the other one just wants to turn the Flatmobile into like a food truck or something, like a room where they can just make food. They're clearly supposed to be like a knock on like YouTubers or something. And so they built so they've bought the bar that was owned by Dick Snerd previously, and it's kind of setting up that they're supposed to be like the new neighbors to the Great Lake Avengers, but there's only one more issue of the series after this, so I don't really see this plot going anywhere. It seems like Zach was kind of setting this up and it's gonna get cut short. Like, it's not going anywhere. You know, I almost considered just not even talking about them because there wasn't really any point, because it's not going to go anywhere, you know. But they are characters, and it is something that happens, so I might as well just mention it. Meanwhile, Good Boy and Lucky are on the road heading off, you know, to find somewhere to stay now that she's left the Great Lake Avengers, and she tells Lucky that she needs to go to the toilet, so they stop off, and she looks at her phone and she sees that Dr. Nod is attacking the city. And she's like, I'm sorry, Lucky. And Lucky knocks on the door and he's like, you're taking a long time in there, sis. And he opens the door and he sees that Good Boy has escaped through the bathroom window. And he's just like, damn. All right, that's not good. So Mr. Immortal and Flatman are heading through the city in the Flatmobile, and they come across Dr. Nod attacking the city, and then Doorman and Gregory show up, and, you know, Gregory's just like, oh, I'm Doorman's, like, new sidekick. And Mr. Immortal's like, well, if you're a part of the team, like, you're gonna need a costume. Do you have any powers? And Gregory's like, not really. I am dead, though, so that's something. So Mr. Immortal tries to attack Dr. Nod, especially because Dr. Nod hints that, like, he's hurt Bertha, and Mr. Immortal's just like, if you've hurt Bertha, I'm gonna make you pay. And he just, like, runs up to Dr. Nod, and then Dr. Nod just steps on him and kills him. And then Bertha's like, that was sweet and all, but I'll take it from here. And she arrives holding a packet of supplements that she has also taken. So she's now grown to be much larger, about the same size as Dr. Nod. So they're going to fight each other. And then in the final issue, the next issue is the grand final of the Great Lake Avengers. All right, so going into the final issue, we begin with Bertha and Dr. Nod fighting each other as giant blobs, and people were filming it, and Flatman's just like, hey guys, don't film this, like, come on, don't you have any decency? And then a car gets thrown at him and lands on top of him, trapping him underneath, and so he asks for Doorman and Greg's help to get him out, and Bertha is also asking for their help with Dr. Nod, and the car that's trapping Flatman catches on fire, and so Doorman's like, we'll be there in a little while, okay? Because at first he's like, we'll be there in a sec, and then the car catches on fire, and he's like, all right, we'll be there, it'll take a little bit longer, which, that joke is funny. Like, there's a couple of jokes sprinkled throughout this that I think are funny, but that's, like, 3 jokes within, like, 100 jokes. that they've just been throwing out over time. Bertha is upset at what Dr. Nod is doing with the supplements and stuff, but she's more upset over the fact that she has to fire her manager. And Jen's just like, how dare you fire me? You still haven't paid my commission. And so Bertha is struggling against Dr. Nod, and that's when Good Boy shows up. He's like, mind if I cut in? And Dr. Nod's just like, oh, come on, that was so forced. And Bertha and Good Boy beat up Dr. Nod's lackeys off panel. Meanwhile, Dr. Nod drinks a batch of Good Bod, like the whole thing, and turns into a ginormous blob. And so Great Lake Avengers decide to do what they call Maneuver 33. So 3 years ago, Doorman and Mr. Immortal planned out a plan, which was if they ever fight a giant monster, they will teleport, like using Doorman, they'll slingshot Doorman and Mr. Immortal so that Mr. Immortal will enter the body of the monster and take him out from the inside. So that's exactly what they do to Dr. Nod. It's really gross. They send Mr. Immortal inside him, and Mr. Immortal travels his way through Dr. Nod all the way to where his heart is, and then he punches Dr. Nod's heart, presumably killing him. And so, like, Dr. Nod just collapses, and they win. It's really as simple as that. Like, there's a lot, like, I don't know, the final confrontation in this is pretty anticlimactic. And also, for some reason, Doorman isn't inside Dr. Nod either. And so, yeah, they beat Dr. Nod, and then they head back to the GLA base where, because at an earlier point, Big Bertha was like, you should have seen Maneuver 34. And Good Boy is like, one day you're going to tell me what Maneuver 34 is, right? And Doorman's like, maybe one day, kid. And then they get a knock on the door, and Flatman goes and answers it. And no joke, he opens the door and finds Deadpool. Deadpool shows up in this issue. And Deadpool basically just shows up to say, hey guys, your series has been cancelled. Turns out people just don't like you. All right, I'm off to go have multiple adventures in my own series. Maybe, you'll get another chance in a few years. And it just literally ends with the GLA just being like, huh. And then it ends. That's the end of the book. It ends right there, with Deadpool showing up and being like, you're cancelled, see ya. And everyone just being like, what? And, most anticlimactic ending to a comic. You can tell that this was sprung last minute, where Zach was like writing issue 6 and probably had started writing issue 7, and then Marvel was like, oh yeah, by the way, the series is cancelled, so come up with a quick ending. And this is what Zach came up with. Probably the most half-assed ending you can possibly come up with just like Deadpool showing up. But if Marvel's just going to cancel a series out of nowhere, then you know what? I don't blame for Zach just half-assing an ending like this, especially when he only has one issue to do it. Having Deadpool show up and say that it's cancelled, that's a fine way to end the series. A much worse ending than the 4-issue miniseries that Dan Slott did, but at least Dan Slott knew that it was only going to be 4 issues, so he was able to prepare for it. So that was the Great Lake Avengers, and since this series, there hasn't been another Great Lake Avengers comic for real this time. I know I said that last time. I was actually kidding. I knew there was another Great Lake Avengers volume. This time, it's for real. There are no other Great Lake Avengers comics. I think since this one, the Great Lake Avengers have just made cameos in other comics, and if they ever come back for another comic, I'm sure I'll cover it. I would love if they get Dan Slott to write it this time. I don't know why they didn't for this one. It's weird when there's only been one writer that has ever written a comic book. Like Dan Slott's the only guy that's written the Great Lake Avengers comics, and I don't know why they didn't ask him to come back and write this. Maybe it was because he was writing Spider-Man at the time. I'm sure he probably would have loved to have come back and write the Great Lake Avengers if they had asked him, but they didn't. They decided to go a different route instead, and I think the route they went was the wrong choice. I'm not saying that Zach Gorman is a bad writer. I just don't think he was right for this. I don't know. Like this Great Lake Avengers, there's potential here. There's a lot of potential here for something good, and like there were little things here and there that showed promise but were never acted upon. There are story threads that were clearly set up that were unfortunately unable to be continued because the series was cut. Like Andrew, remember Andrew, Flatman's boyfriend from the flashbacks? I'm going to call him his boyfriend because that's what he was, even though they didn't outright say it. He was clearly supposed to be a love interest for Flatman. And how he received a parcel from Flatman, and we got no continuation of that plotline. That just kind of ended there. And, you know, the two guys that showed up that were going to be their new neighbors, and that's not going to go anywhere. Just all these plot, like, it really goes to show that, like, Zach must have not, like, it really must have been last minute that they were cancelled, because Zach was setting up plot threads in the 6th issue, like the second to last issue. So it literally must have been, like, right after that issue, Marvel was like, it's over. Like, they gave him no time to sculpt a final story arc or something. And I guess that's just how Marvel operates with their comics, is that when they cancel it, they give you no time to come up with a proper ending unless it's a really popular series. Meanwhile, at DC, I've noticed a lot of the time, if DC is canceling a book, they'll let the writer know ahead of time, and then the writer will be able to do, like, you know, a final 2-part to 4-part story to wrap up the series. You know, there's very few DC titles I've ever read that have ended abruptly like this. Yeah, I'm sad that it had to end this way, especially because those last couple of issues, they had a lot of promising things in it. I will say, this series got better as it went on, but it still wasn't what I wanted in a Great Lake Avengers comic. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and I'll see you next week for something else. I don't know what I'm going to be covering next week, but we'll have to see. If I get my phone back, then it's going to be Identity Crisis, but I'm not going to say that's for certain because I really don't know. But if it's not Identity Crisis, it's probably going to be another Marvel-related project. I'm on a bit of a Marvel thing at the moment because, you know, I don't release a lot of Marvel content on my channel because I'm focusing heavily on a lot of DC stuff. So it's good to be getting out all these Marvel videos lately. So yeah, we'll see. I was thinking Iron Fist might be a cool one to do. If it's not Identity Crisis, then you can probably expect that I'm going to release an Iron Fist video where I talk about the original Iron Fist comics, including like his early appearances. So yeah, look forward to that. And yeah, hope to see you next week. Bye.